Today, we are going to look at the strangest Catan rules that exist, and only exist for tournaments, and not the actual game itself. I've played in a ton of live tournaments in my own life, and I've also won my fair share. So I've personally seen all of these rules be used all the way to abused. And the last rule I tell you about is going to blow your mind, as it literally changes the way that people play the game, and this is tournaments only. The first rule actually has been abused a bunch, and it was seen taking place at USA Nationals 2021 in the championship finals. And that rule is a dice tilt rule. So if either of the dice are completely obscured by rolling off the table or landing in a cup or pocket, well, you have to re-roll both of the dice. But here is where the rule gets controversial. If one of the dice is a little bit tilted or cocked, to balance one dice on top of the other. And if it slides off, well, you have to re-roll both dice. And hopefully you can see why this rule is a little bit controversial. So we can see this taking place at US Nationals 2021. So in this first example here, Caleb rolls a dice and it's tilted. So he carefully puts the dice on top of the other and it falls off. But now in the second example, Bo really wants a 7.
7. 7.
And so he rolls. But this time, there's a total of 3 attempts of trying to balance the dice because it's an advantageous roll for Bo. So he is really incentivized to try to keep the roll. But you can see why this is easily abused because if you like the roll, you just do a very careful job of placing one dice on top of the other to keep it. But if you don't like the roll, you can carelessly drop one dice on top of the other to make it so it falls off, therefore re-rolling the dice. And it can be even further abused by rolling towards the board to increase the chances of the dice being tilted. So now you have greater chances to redo the dice roll or keep it. And we saw this at the final table because both times the dice were rolled and tilted, they rolled towards the table. So how do we prevent this abuse? Well, easy solution. Just make an agreement with the table that if the dice is tilted a little bit at all, then you have to re-roll both dice. And the second solution, just use a dice cup. Simple as that. Now, the next rule catches a lot of beginners and first-time tournament goers off guard. So essentially what happens is round 1, everyone plays on the same board. In round 2, everyone plays on a different board, but it's all the same. And round 3, it's the same thing one more time. But everyone plays on the exact same board. So it's a fascinating case study because let's say on this board over here, third position had a really strong position on this board. And everyone who won as third position, well, they went on this specific placement. So suddenly it becomes pretty obvious after the round is over which positions usually come out as strongest and which positions struggle. Unfortunately, like any rule, this can also be abused. Let's say you're in the first position in just a really, really tough spot for first position, and you're taking your sweet time thinking about what to do. The thing is, well, everyone around you is playing on the exact same board. So if you just look around and like, oh, well, that's what that person decided to do. Huh, that's interesting. Now, this is just like cheating on your homework. Don't do it because you're not actually going to get better at the game. So in terms of solutions, there's no way to stop this, unfortunately. But the biggest thing is just you need to focus on your own game as that's the best way to improve. So most people will just roll the dice to determine who goes first, second, third, and fourth. And it's usually the highest roll that indicates that you go first. But in tournaments, you actually get to choose your positioning. So you get to choose if you go first, second, third, or fourth position after looking and analyzing the board. But this is usually reserved for the semifinals and the finals, and it depends on your seeding. So if you're the highest seed, you get to look at a board, analyze it, then make a decision on what position is the best. And this is a super understudied part of the game, yet it's absolutely massively important. So here's what I recommend. Whenever you're at home playing with friends, instead of rolling the dice and saying, oh, I roll the highest dice, I get to go first. Instead, you do, I roll the highest dice, so I get to choose what position I place. So I can choose to place first, second, third, or fourth. Because, you know, what if you roll the highest dice, but the board sucks for the first position? So after the highest dice chooses their position, then the second highest dice chooses their position, then the third highest dice chooses their position, and then, you know, the lowest dice roll doesn't get to choose their position, and it's just stuck with whatever is left. And this adds a huge pre-game element of skill before the game even begins. And it's how competitive players practice and hone their skills for tournaments. But this next rule literally breaks and rigs Catan tournaments in your favor. And it's this. There's 2 formats of Catan tournaments. The first format is you have 3 rounds of prelim rounds, and then you take the top 16 for the semifinal round. And whoever wins the finals, well, they win the entire tournament. So a total of 5 rounds. But the second format is a little bit more unknown. So you do 3 rounds of prelims, and instead of taking the top 16, you straight up take the top 4 for a final table. And whoever wins the final table, well, you win the tournament. So it's a total of 4 rounds instead of 5 rounds. But the rule says the host of the tournament can choose a tournament format if it's 28 entrants or below. So if it's below 28 people, you have an option to skip the semifinal round. I've been in a tournament before where there's only 16 players that show up. So literally, even if you lose all 3 of your prelim rounds, well, you still advance to the semifinals because the tournament host decided to not skip it. So the first 3 rounds are literally useless because everyone advances. That means you can lose all 3 of your games and still make it to the semifinals. You can play one game and lose that game, and then skip your next 2 games, then come back and still make it to the semifinals. And the reason why this happens is a lot of Catan tournament hosts are new and have never hosted before. So in a 16-person tournament, they still might choose to have a semifinals, which doesn't really make sense because the first 3 rounds are completely useless. And another story of a more extreme version of this is, I have a friend, let's call him Rob, and he also decided to play in a tournament where only 12 people showed up, which is the minimal amount of people for it to count as an official tournament. So you have to understand that a lot of tournaments occur in convention centers, like a board game convention, an anime convention, basically a place for a bunch of nerds, which is also a perfect place for Catan tournaments. And there's 2 types of people who enter Catan tournaments. There's one, the sweaty tryhards like me, who go to conventions specifically to play and win a Catan tournament. And number 2, the casual players who see, oh, there's a Catan tournament at the convention. Oh, I play Catan, let's play in this tournament. Not realizing that Catan tournaments literally take like 10 hours to finish. So what happens is a lot of these casual players, let's say, play 1 or 2 rounds of the tournament and they'll drop out because, you know, you're at a convention. You want to enjoy it. You don't want to just spend the entire time at a Catan tournament. So my try-hard friend went to this convention to play in a Catan tournament specifically. And this tournament was actually skipping the semifinals. So they take the top 4 instead of the top 16. And there's only 12 people. So in order to advance, you have to do pretty well in the prelims. So he played on round 1 and it was harder than he thought. And he lost at 7 points. All good. We have round 2. But he played in round 2 and he lost again, this time at 9 points. But you know, it's okay. We have one more round. As long as he wins one more game, well, he has a good chance to advance to the finals. But he also lost round 3, and this time it was at 8 points. So he lost all 3 rounds and was out of the tournament. Or so he thought, because every single time he played another round, more and more casuals would drop out at the tournament. And by the end of the 3 rounds, when it was time for the finals, there are only 6 players left, and he managed to score better than the other 2. So he advanced directly to the final table with 0 wins. And it gets even better, because then he won the final table, which won him the entire tournament. So he literally won a regional championship tournament with a single game. Guys, the truth is that being a regional champion means nothing. Another side note, if you really want to win a Catan tournament and play at US Nationals, consider buying a ticket to the Midwest and playing in one of their tournaments, where barely anyone enters. It's way different compared to the intense New York tournaments that go over 100 people. Instead, at the Midwest tournaments, there's 15 to 20 people that show up, so it's way easier to win a tournament that way. But this last rule is so crazy, it literally changes how the game is played on a fundamental level. It's crazy to me that it even exists. And this rule doesn't actually appear anywhere in the rule books or tournament pages. But it is a well-known rule that's been recently introduced at US Nationals. So if you haven't been there before, you would have never heard of it. And it's, you can mute a player if it's your turn. Basically ask them to shut up and they have to shut up. And this year at US Nationals, they're considering introducing something called mute pucks. So if someone is talking on your turn and you want them to shut up, you just give them a mute puck and they can't talk anymore. Can you see why this changes the game so much? It can be easily abused? Because if Rick over here is at 9 points and is trading for the win, I might immediately recognize that and be like, whoa, 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 you can't take that trade. He's gonna win. But if he preemptively gives me a mute puck so I can't talk, he can then talk to Jerry and then make a trade for the win. And there's nothing I can do because of the mute puck. Furthermore, a lot of times, the table will consist of 2 strong players and 2 weaker players. And the game often devolves into, which one of these stronger players can exploit the weaker players better. But with the mute puck, now it's going to be the 2 stronger players constantly muting each other on their turns, trying to table talk and trade with the noobs. Like imagine, if I'm playing on a table with Bo Peng, the USA National Champion, and I'm trying to trade with some newer players. I mean, you can bet I'm muting him. And I bet that he would also mute me too. It's totally fair game. Now, this rule can destroy a lot of strategy in the game because it's harder to intercept trades, it's harder to work together as a table, and some trades might go through when it totally shouldn't, such as giving away the game. Because, well, you can't protest against any of this if you're muted. But the reason why the rule exists is to prevent someone from talking over each other. Let's say you're on a table with a big table talker. Every single time you try to do a trade, all they do is just talk over you and say how you're winning. You can't trade them because, oh, they're racing you for largest army. They have a strong port. They have crazy production. And it's talking to the point where the other players can't even hear you. Then I think it's pretty reasonable to want to mute someone. Also, people can be pretty aggressive in Catan tournaments where you just kind of want to shut them up. Especially at US Nationals where everyone is extremely competitive. So those are the 5 rules and I hope you found them interesting. I'm Delighted, the Internet's Catan teacher, and I'll see you next time.